Good afternoon. I am Rafael Ochoa, General Manager of Hillside Memorial Park and Mortuary. For over 35 years, Hillside Memorial Park has partnered with American Jewish University to enhance the Jewish community through educational programming that promotes the importance of constructive dialogue. Now, more than ever, it is imperative that we use our voice to stand up for what we believe in, to protect others, and to share our deepest support and thoughts with family and friends. This important time spent together seamlessly weaves together past, present, and future generations, ensuring our narratives resonate and inspire countless generations ahead. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our Temple Israel of Hollywood Senior Rabbi, Mari Cherno, to share a few words.
Thank you so much, Raf, and thank you to Hillside and to AJU for putting together this important series. We know in the Jewish tradition that words are important and words are powerful. We can elevate people with words, we can support people with words, we can harm people with words, we can even kill people with words. These end-of-life conversations are difficult to have, and we put them off and we resist them. But this series reminds us how important they are and how using our words with our closest, dearest loved ones will help us strengthen our family bonds, understand our own desires, and communicate them to those we love. Thank you for being here.
What beautiful words from Rabbi Cherno and Rafael Ochoa, the CEO of Hillside. And I can't think of a better way for us to begin the third part of our three-part series with Hillside and American Jewish University than with the words that are going to be spoken today between myself and Rabbi Jonathan Aaron. As you know, we started with talking about death over dinner with Michael Hebb, and then we transitioned to feeling empowered with advanced directives with Rabbi Jason Weiner. If you have not heard those two, I encourage you to listen to the recordings because this three-part series really builds upon one another, which brings us to today, which is the mitzvah of crafting your ethical will with our guest. So, questions. Is an ethical will different from your regular will? Oh. Who reads the ethical will? Is a mitzvah to write one? How do you write it? These are just some of the questions we're going to answer today, with my guest, who has been guiding families at Temple Emmanuel since 1996. Yes, you heard me correctly, 1996. Most recently as the senior rabbi of this very precious community. An expert in supporting people find their spiritual expression, Rabbi Aaron has been of late helping people find their voice as they are navigating their legacy and their final words to their progeny and to their future children's children. Welcome, Rabbi Aaron.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here and great to have a conversation with you.
Always so happy to always see you. So I'm going to start just with definitions so that we're all on the same page. What is an ethical will and how is it different from a regular will?
I think it was interesting that in a little video that we saw to start off with, they were talking about words that we pass down to future generations and the values that we pass down to future generations. And all that we usually talk about when it comes to death and dying in Jewish tradition are mourning rituals or the stuff I'm going to leave behind to my family. But an ethical will is more about the values that you've lived your life and how you want to pass those down to your family. And, we don't always get an opportunity to tell the people, our children, our grandchildren, our spouses, exactly what we think about our lives and the world. And so it's a separate document than the kind of legal stuff that we have to deal with when we pass away. It's more, this is what I've learned in my life, and I want to share that with you, which is something that some of us do with our families on a regular basis. But, a lot of us don't share those core values in writing, in video, in art, however you want to share it. It's very rare that we formally share these words. And I think what an ethical will does is it puts it into a formal place where I'm going to share my values and I'm going to really take time to think about that and what I want to pass down to my families. Yeah, I'll just say one other thing about this. We have a tradition at Temple Emmanuel for Yiskor, that we play a video, kind of like in the Academy Awards, right, in memorandum, in memoriam. And so people send us pictures of people who've passed away. And one question I've always asked is, what picture would you want to represent you? Would you be smiling? Would you not be smiling? Would you be with family? Would you be with friends? Would you be doing a sport that you love to do or playing an instrument you love to play? Like, what kind of picture would you choose to define yourself? An ethical will is like a whole picture of how you define yourself. So I'll end with that.
So beautifully said. It actually brought me a little teary because I started to think about what picture would I want as my final sort of image. And the idea of choosing that beforehand is being very intentional about not only planning for your departure, but also being intentional about what you want to leave behind, which is what you said. We leave stuff, but stuff is very different than values. I mean, they're both stuff, but values endure long past the stuff expires.
I might even say the stuff that you're given, I don't know, the stuff is a rather colloquial word, but the stuff that you're given actually reminds you of the person. But how are you reminded of that person, right? Like, what does this thing conjure up in your mind? The ethical will is like something that you can hold up as a mirror. So, oh, here's this thing I have from my dad or my mom. It reminds me that this is what they valued. So, it can kind of work together.
And I love what you also said is like, you may be a very verbal parent or grandparent and talk to your children all the time, telling them your values, your stories, but you may not also be a more quiet or reticent one. And so this kind of eliminates personality because it allows you to show your personality through your ethical will. And I wanted to jump right in. We think of ethical wills as written documents. And you alluded to, video, art, tell us, what is an ethical will today?
So, going along with what you were just saying, there's different kinds of personalities, right? So there's people that are very verbal. There's people that love to write. That person, I would say, write it, write it in prose, write it in poetry, however you love to write. But there's other people. I taught this class a couple of years ago, and there was an artist in the class. She did this incredible piece of art, and all of the images that were on this piece of art represented who she was. There was another person who wanted to do this on video so you could see him talking. And he had other videos of life experiences that he had. There were still others. One person did a collage of various parts of their lives that was on this, that was part of a book. But the idea is how you express yourself. That's completely, there's no rules to this. It can be written, but it can be anything you want. I like to write music, and I express myself. My spiritual expression is a lot through music. I have my songs all put together in one place because that's something I want my children to carry on, is my melodies and my expression of my Judaism. That's going to be one part of what I leave behind to them for my ethical. Well, mine's going to be like, kind of a media frenzy, I think, in the end, because I have some things written,
Because you're going to have music and art and all kinds of things.
Everything that I can think of. Well, probably not art. I'm not a very good artist, but there'll be some writing, maybe little, some clippings, and I've already been writing a lot, but it's this other stuff that I'm really almost more interested in that they can really feel me, because I think that's the big difference between a regular will and an ethical will. An ethical will is so that the people that come after you feel you, know what you stood for, and kind of what you cared about.
And there's an intimacy there that I don't think is always there with a regular will. With an ethical will, there's this sense of real intimacy. I just suggested to a family who has an extraordinary art collection to film the father talking about his passion for art, and each piece, that will be his ethical will. Right. Another family, he's gone through the book of Psalms and written his own music to each chapter, and then discussed it with a friend, making a compilation, which will be for his children. right? It doesn't have to be published. It doesn't have to be, a Random House acknowledged book. It can just be an expression of your heart, your deepest prayers, wishes, and dreams for your children and your grandchildren. So I understand you taught a class and you're teaching a class with 3 to 4 sessions. Why teach a class on ethical wills? I mean, I understand teaching Bible and Chumash, but why teach a class on ethical wills? What did you find was an obstacle for people getting started? It's a bit of a leading question.
Well, I think that was the issue, is people understand what an ethical will is, but it's hard to just get started. Well, what's supposed to be in it? Are there any prompts that I could use? I'm not quite sure how to begin. I'm not even sure what goes into one. I've never seen one. So what I tried to do, and later on, oh boy, there's someone working on the yard next door. Is that really distracting?
No, we can't even hear it. Don't even worry.
Okay, great. So it's really kind of a Kickstarter to get them going. There will be some text that we'll share at the end that people can take that has like a rationale. It's like, what is this about? What kinds of things are in there? Then there are some prompts, that can get you started. Certain questions you can ask yourself just to get going. And then as you start going, what we found in the class, between the class where we talked about all of it, and then we had 2 sharing sessions, as a matter of fact, is that once people got started, they started saying, oh, this is interesting. I think I want to go in this direction when I move forward. And so just to have a starting point is the best, because there's no definitive ending point. It's wherever you want to take it. And that's what we found in the class.
Well, and also I think when you have a class, there's an accountability, right?
Yeah.
It's one of those projects. You may have 15 projects that you're sorting the photo albums, all these projects that you have
Right.
waiting to be done. And the class, I think, is a really nice way to have accountability. And you don't actually have to have a class. We're not promoting the class, but the idea is that you have somewhere or someone that says, let's work on this for an hour each week. Let's spend 6 weeks doing it, or let's spend 3 weeks doing it.
Right.
You taught this class. What did you notice were the commonalities between the messaging, between the ethical wills? And did you notice any differences?
Well, I mean, it's the same thing that I've noticed just being a rabbi in people's lives, is that
Please
the spectrum of life is overwhelming.
explain.
And all of us find through our own experiences, which are as unique as there are human beings in the world, that everyone's story is so different. And another thing that we found was that Judaism and the values within Judaism was something that was in common between all of the people in the class, yet the values they took from Judaism, the way they thought about their Judaism, the way they expressed their Judaism was completely different from person to person. And so what we all discovered was, just because Joe does his ethical will one way and talks about his life one way, Elisa is going to have a completely different take on what happened to her in her life. And she needs to express it in her way, not his way. So, there was a little bit of comparisons that were going on at the very beginning when we were sharing, but in the end, everyone found their own unique avenue for how they want to express themselves. So, I mean, it's funny you say that. The one commonality was that there was like zero commonality in what people learn about their lives based on their experiences. It was actually quite incredible. And both times I've taught it, we had more than the 3 classes because people wanted to share, and it took a long time for everyone to share. And that was great. There's one other thing that I haven't mentioned yet that is really important. A lot of times there's one person in a family that knows most of the family history. And I've been to rooms where a person's passed away and we're sitting in the room and they say, oh, Joe would have, he's the one that kept the family, who everyone was and where they all came from, and he knew all of our history. So it's also important, as part of an ethical will, where'd you come from? Who are the people that came before you? It is your ethical will, but you're influenced by the people that come before you as well. So that was kind of an important aspect. And I guess when I think about it, there were several that had a family tree as part of their ethical will so that people knew where they came from.
It's also now with ancestry.com and all these tools online, you know, that you can start with these family trees. And right as you said that, a shout out to my own cousin, Adam Schwartz, who keeps our family records, which like everybody has that person.
Right.
So I literally was like, I know my person, right? He keeps our family records. So this commonality is that there weren't commonalities, but you said that people interpreted different Jewish values differently. So for example, like Tikkun Olam, how would one person interpret it differently from another?
I mean, that is that's a good example. Tikkun Olam, you know, there are some people who live by Tikkun Olam because of the Luriana Kabbalah story. They know that story. They know where it comes from. There's others that Tikkun Olam is just a kind of a catchphrase for making the world a better place, as opposed to repairing the world, as it would be in the Luriana Kabbalah understanding of it.
Tell us the Luriana Kabbalah story for those that don't know.
Okay, so
you can tell it quickly.
So the origins of the phrase Tikkun Olam come from Isaac Luria, who was a late Kabbalistic thinker towards the end of their heyday, and he had a concept of creation, which was that at one time God was all there was. God took up all space and all time. And so in order for the world to be created, God was taking up everything. God had to pull back from God's self in order to create in this vacuum where God didn't exist. So God pulls back, creates a vacuum, and then starts shining light through vessels into this space, creating the material world, creating everything that goes into our world. So according to Luria, there was a cosmic explosion as this light was coming out down into the world, because God's light is so powerful. And so there was this explosion where all the light came down onto earth. All of the shards of the vessels that were holding the light kind of cover over God's light. And so the world was never truly completed according to God's plan. Our goal as Tikkun Olam, to repair the world, is to uncover the darkness and allow God's light to shine. And that is where the phrase Tikkun Olam comes from.
Well, it's so nice that you say that, because there are some people that are very motivated by that story and it speaks to them. And some people, Tikkun Olam, like you said, is a catchphrase for just being a good person and doing good in the world.
Right.
I also understand a lot of people came of different ages to your class.
Right.
And think of this project as like when you have time. But you said that a lot of younger people came, and why is that?
You know, I think that first of all, I think a lot of the younger people are journaling, and I think that has something to do with it, right? Because if you have a journal, you are writing your thoughts and your feelings and your values almost every day. I know I have two children. They both write journals in their journals every single day, and they're, 20 years old. So I think that one can reflect upon their life, their entire life. When one's deciding, I'm going to have to pass something down to my children. If you don't have children, that might not be in your mind. If you don't have a family, but everyone is trying to, I think, everyone is trying to make their way through life in the best way they can, and to try to learn lessons and to carry values with them so that they can live with peace and harmony in their lives. How one gets there and the lessons that people learn in getting there is really important to pass on to others. And I think young people were like, I actually have something to say. And it's not too late to do it. Unfortunately, I'm in a suit today because I have a funeral later today to a man who died very suddenly. He had an ethical will, and to read it, it touched my soul to read it, because now, I knew this about him anyway, but I knew how much Judaism and the holidays and his family and music, how important all of those things were to him. So it even informed me in doing this funeral today, what elements need to be in it, need to reflect what he had written in this ethical will. It wasn't written to me, although thankfully his daughters shared it with me. But in reading it, it gave me such an incredibly full picture of who this person was. And he died suddenly. He wasn't one of those people that was waiting. Oh, I'll write the ethical will when I get a chance and when I'm older, and when I have my great grandchildren and great grandchildren. He wrote it. I believe it was 10 to 15 years ago. He was 70 when he passed, so he was in his mid-50s when he decided that he would write it. Actually, there was another note somewhere I found that said once he turned 50, he got a little bit nervous, saying, listen, we need to be grateful for every day we have. And that's when he decided that he would write down his thoughts.
It's so touching. And also it made me think about how many people have a wonderful relationship with their rabbi, but they don't know their day-to-day life. And so even his ethical will not only affected his progeny, but it also affected you, so that you could give him what I say a send-off or tuck him into bed with a lot more intimacy. And I think that's what we're talking about today. And I think it's one of the reasons Hillside really supports these conversations, because the more you have these conversations, the more it makes end of life decisions much easier, right? Because you have partners in this process. So what's the number one prompt you think to get started with your ethical will? And I love how I do it with a lot of enthusiasm. I'm like so excited.
Ooh, the number one prompt. Wait a minute. I have some prompts here. Maybe I should take a look and see what they are.
Yeah, feel free.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff here. I guess.
I have my favorite prompt.
Go ahead. Let me hear yours.
While you look, I have my favorite one, which is tell me about your mother's mother. Because when you talk about your mother's mother, i.e. your maternal grandmother, you discover and uncover a lot about yourself. And it's our lineage. So it's my first favorite prompt when I'm doing an ethical will. But give me another one.
A lot of them, what was most important to you? That's a hard one. But I also think, how did you spend your time is also an interesting one, because how one spends their time really reflects what their values are. And so that's another one I think that's good. Are there any, would you identify any lessons that you've learned? These are just kind of simple things just to kind of move forward on it. I actually think that one of the important ones is what were some mistakes that you've made in your life?
In Rabbi Leader's book, we had him last year talking about ethical wills from a different valence, because he had just published his book on ethical wills. But he literally said, like, what's your biggest regret? What's your biggest regret?
That's a good one.
It's a good one, because it's like, we all have regrets and we want to live regret-free, right? That's the idealized version of living, but we have mistakes that we've said, if I got a do-over, I would do it over. So they're not legally binding, right, Rabbi Aaron?
They're not legally binding.
So what do you do about that when someone says, I'm only interested in the will, I'm not interested in the ethical will? Have you ever had that situation?
I mean, there's people that are uncomfortable writing it. First of all, they may not have a high view of themselves, and they don't think they have anything to say. I believe we all have something to say. It's like, in some ways, I don't know if I can, I can't back this up with any scientific knowledge, but in some ways, I believe that we have two people that we carry around with us. We carry around the person that's in public, and we carry around the person that's inside of us. I think the ethical will is what's inside of us. A lot of times a person's outer life is reflective of the things that are inside them, but a lot of times it isn't. And so this is the thing.
Very fractured lives at times.
Yeah. I mean,
I love that.
Ideally, we want our outer lives and inner lives to match, right? So that we are who we feel we are in the inside, we bring that out into the world, but that's not always the case. And I think that what we're trying to get at in ethical wills is no matter how you saw me, this is what I really have been thinking about, and these are the things that I truly attach myself to.
And right as you said that, I thought, wow, how different we are at 50 versus 60 versus 70. Do you do revisions on your ethical will?
I think
or
it's,
ads or
I-
summaries or,
it-
what do they call them? Like
it's a document on my computer, and every once in a while I go and write more. You know what I mean?
add
That's
an addendum,
just
right?
add a little thing. And also I don't pay a lot of attention to grammar when I'm writing it, because and then I go back a while later and kind of take a look at it and clean it up grammatically. But I just want to get my thoughts out.
Right. And just sometimes you can dictate it also into your Apple phone, right?
Right,
It's very
right.
easy to have it transcribed. You don't even have to, if you're a talker more than a writer, it's a really easy thing. There was something that I wanted to go back to that I thought you said that was beautiful. You may not feel like you have something to say.
Mhm.
You may feel that your life was mundane or simple, or it's just that you're not enough. What's the demons that you have to combat to get over that?
Well, I mean, if anyone is suffering from this, I would recommend perhaps going to therapy and working through this.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
We're all about giving tools, right? So
exactly.
therapy is a great tool. Your rabbi is a great tool.
Yeah, I think so. You can go and speak to, maybe it's important to when someone like that would get started, to sit with someone they know well and trust, to just kind of talk through, well, why is it that I feel I don't have anything to say, or that the person could say, well, tell me some of your experiences, or just maybe even starting with that is, instead of it being based on values, it could be based on your story. Just start telling your story. This is where I was born. These are the people I knew. This is where I moved. This is where I went. There was one woman who was very concerned that her children would know that she moved cross country, to be with their father, and that trip was an influential trip in their lives. That's not necessarily a value, but it is something that people need to know about, that person wanted people to know about. So there's that too. I mean, it doesn't have to be any particular way. If you want to just kind of tell a narrative of your story, why not?
Interesting. What about the people who only want to tell the good parts? I mean, you and I know that. We go to do a funeral, we meet with the family, and they're like, don't say that, don't say that. And really, as a rabbi, you want to give a full picture
Yeah.
of the person to give them true dignity. But what about the people that are like, I'm only going to write the good parts? What do you say to them?
If that's the way you want to do it, then go for it.
Is there value in writing the difficulties and the missteps? And
I think so. I think that you're leaving behind who you were in this ethical will. I don't know about you, but I'm almost perfect. But yeah, there's a lot that I needed to work on, and there were a lot of mistakes that I've made, and I want my kids to know those mistakes. I want my grandkids.
when people don't want to tell me their foibles or their mistakes, I remind them that the Bible, especially Genesis, is a story of missteps. It's not a story of successes. It's a story
Right.
of challenges and obstacles and
Right.
how we overcame them. And the fact that that is the most read book of all time, and that is the core foundation of who we are as a people, tells us something very fundamental about Judaism, which is that we are defined by how we overcome our difficulties, not that we avoid them or never discuss them.
Right.
So something that always I think about. So we have so many.
But there's also, hold on, Sherry. There's also, I just want to finish one last thing on this.
Please.
Also, we learn more from our mistakes than we do our victories, right?
Yes and no. I mean, I think we learn from both. It used to be the wisdom was we learn from our mistakes because we grow, but I also think we grow from our victories. Sometimes we realize, wow, we're capable of far more than we anticipated.
Yes, that is true. That is
right.
true.
And sometimes we don't dream big enough. So I think it's both. I think it's yes and yes. So I think that's very true. Someone wrote a great question. What is the opposite of an ethical will? I don't know.
Nothing, doing nothing, not offering anything.
It's like not the opposite of love is not hate, it's ambivalence, right? It's that same idea of just dying with nothing left behind, right? And if there's something that's so treasured, it's your words, as was said in the beginning.
Yeah. I would say they're actually your thoughts even more, right? Your words, the words you're going to write in a paper are actually your thoughts and ideas that are just put down into words.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Someone asked, is this a prompt? And I love that he asked, is this a prompt? Like we have to give us a permission, which I don't think you ever need permission, but are most people the most honest about those they love, and want to convey their principles if they knew they were dying? Like, so is the prompt, sorry, forgive me, is the prompt, if you knew you were only going to live one more day, is that a prompt that's a viable prompt, or is that maybe not the way to go?
I think if that prompt helps you, then I would use that. I mean, look, in the Talmud, it says that that we should repent for our sins one day before we die, and we never know the day that we're going to die. So we should repent for our sins every single day. I would say that that's true of this too. If you're waiting for, when you're old and gray to write this eulogy, I mean, the fact is, if the prompt is, if we know we're going to die, we all know that we're going to die.
So I just made a mistake, and we've been talking a lot for the last 30 minutes about leaving this message for your children and your grandchildren. But what if you don't have any heirs? What if you don't have any family? What if your experience will disappear in thin air? Is it worthwhile to write an ethical will? And if so, for whom?
I mean, that really is a very good point. I think sometimes we're a little heteronormative, thinking that everyone has children and gets married and all of this. And, I would say it's leaving it to those that cared about us. There's something I think really powerful about, especially after a person leaves the planet, that we really can feel and know them. This is the way for people to know us more than.
And forgive me, because I really feel very strongly that every person is a world, as it says in Judaism.
Yeah.
And your world touches so many lives, even the ones you don't even know.
Right.
My mother was dying, as many of you know, 14 years ago. And she kept saying to me, I'm so grateful that I have the gift of dying, even with brain cancer, because she got to find out how many lives she touched, and she did not think that at all. So we know who we've affected. And
Right.
so behind those words, we don't know what message, who needs to hear it, and how important we were to them.
And the last person is yourself.
Yes.
How often do you get time to think about what's really important to you in your life? We're so busy living that we're not reflecting on that. And it's an opportunity for us too.
Right. And I would argue sometimes we're not even busy living. We're busy anticipating or regretting.
Right.
We're forgetting to be. So it's so beautiful that you just said that.
Yeah.
So someone just asked, great question, separate ethical wills for each child. So you have 5 children. Do you do 5 ethical wills?
Again, if you think that would be important to do, yes. I think of it more like the first time we really know about an ethical will is Jacob on his deathbed, when he talks to all of his children, right? Now
Reuben didn't get a very good one.
There weren't too many that were very good. And
but Reuben's especially, he was pissed.
But, and also the most famous letter is from Ibn Tibban about 1,000 years ago. And he basically chastised all of his children in it. And so that's something else, I mean, I don't know if you want to yell at people in there as opposed to writing, really about yourself. I would say that if I were thinking about this, and I hadn't really thought about that question before, is that I might write one that's kind of my overall view, and then I might write separate letters to each one of those people if I wanted to have a personal interaction with them.
I know certain parents that write a letter to their child on their birthday every year, so that when they die, they have a collection of the memories of each year. But
that's wonderful.
I haven't been as diligent in doing that. So someone asked a question, and I'm not sure I totally understand. It's from one rabbi to another. Didn't King David basically write the opposite of an ethical will? I'm not sure I understand that question. I ask it because I'm turning to you. Do you think that's what King David did? I've never really thought about it that way.
I actually think it was Saul that passed down some information to David on being king, or was it David that passed it down to Solomon? But I don't, yeah, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I'm not really sure about that question. So if you wrote that in, feel free to write a little bit more about it. You,
I mean, I might say that actually Ecclesiastes, which right, might have been the first ethical will. Now that I think about it.
yeah, I think Ecclesiastes is a better ethical will
Yeah.
example. But again, these are all different models. And as you said in the beginning, it really doesn't matter if it's spoken or written or artistic or music. It's an expression of you. And I also think you said something that I didn't want to skip over, Jonathan, which is that you have to keep the focus on you, right? If you focus on what your children didn't do and how they disappointed you, that's your last note to them.
Yeah.
I think an ethical will, like you said, is really about focusing on you and what you're leaving, right? Your regrets, your successes, your messages, your values. Because what happens when you focus on your children or someone else? You tell
Well,
me.
you know, it's kind of like when you it's the opposite of a in some ways it's the opposite of a bar bat mitzvah speech that a parent gives to their child, right? And that one I always say, you want it to be about your child and what you want for them in the future. I think an ethical will is more about, this is what my life was, this is what I've learned, and you're going to take this with you, but it's about what I've learned, not what I want to put onto another person. It'll be put on that other person when they read it, but they're going to interpret it in their own way, and they're going to make it work for them, just how all of us have made our lives work for us, given the same raw materials. So, I think to concentrate on what you believe, what you think, the values that you've taken and learned in your life, the relationships that have been most important to you, so that when we're not here anymore, there is a place where people can go to really understand who we are.
There's so many questions I still would want to ask my mother, and she died very prematurely. And what happens is that they'll come up now, 15 years later almost, and I'll think to myself, I wish I had her words. And so sometimes I think it's also important in the ethical will to write questions that you don't have solved, right? Like unanswered questions for me are, right? These are some of the unanswered questions, and maybe in your lifetime you'll be able to answer that, which is
Yeah, and you're the people that are reading it may have those similar questions, or these are these were some difficulties I had. These were some challenges I had. They may be the same challenges that the people who are reading it are going through, and to know, oh, wow, my grandfather went through the same thing. I mean, that might make people feel better that their relatives went through a similar experience that they're going through.
right. Misery loves company, but also just to
Yeah.
be affirmed in our experience is a very powerful thing. I'm really serious. So Paul wrote in, David told Solomon to get revenge on some of David's enemies. Is that the opposite of an ethical will?
That sounds like it's part of an ethical will. There's nothing that says that the ethical will has to be, I mean, I would like it to be a positive, life enhancing document, but it could also be a document. These are the people that I didn't like, and these are the people I want you to stay away from. And, I want you to hurt these people. I mean, you could write that in there. My question would be, would you want to?
Right. And what problem are you solving for? Right? Why are you trying to protect your children? Are you trying to protect your friends and family? Was it that you just wanted to exact revenge? I think it's always important to look at our motives, not just the execution of them, right? So the big question, and in a few minutes, we're going to wrap up and you have these beautiful prompts, but I wanted to get into the details. Where do you keep your ethical will? Do you give it to your rabbi? Do you give it to your banker? Do you give it to your lawyer? Where do you keep it?
That's a very good question. For the most part, I think most people keep them on their computers for a time being and don't even print them out, or won't have it. I would say, as soon as you feel that a draft of it is ready, or that it's ready in some way, I would print it out so you have a physical copy. And I also people I know keep them in safe deposit boxes. Other people have kept them next to their will. A lot of people do that, right? Because then upon a person's passing, when you look through all of their kind of materials, you'd find that ethical will there. I know quite a few people in our class shared the ethical will with their families right when they did it.
So that's one of the questions that's coming up, which is really, do you share it when you're alive?
Why not?
Right? Like, do you share that ethical will when you're alive as opposed to reading it, having someone else read it when you're deceased? That's so powerful.
So much.
It's so powerful. I have to tell you, I do share these imparted wisdoms with my children, and I do it on a more structured basis. And every time my teenagers are like, oh my God, here we go again.
I roll.
But I can tell you, as they're getting older, recently one said, okay, when am I hearing mine? So there is something that's going in, even if you get the eye roll, don't talk about death, mom, why are you doing this? Even if you get all that, there's something that's being inculcated, even if it feels a little awkward, right? And one final question is today the day to start?
Yes.
Just
Today's
sit down
the
at
day.
the computer, take 15 minutes, and right after this, say what I want for you, or I want to tell you about my life, and just start there.
Yep.
So today we have some giveaways, thanks to you, which are the 3 handouts, which allow you to actually, I'll let you explain, Jonathan.
Okay.
The first handout is what?
The first handout is kind of the rationales, right? So I think it has a couple of examples, but it's basically why are we doing this? What is there a little bit of history on it? But it's mostly about describing what it is in different ways. I think there's probably 4 or 5 different ways that you can think about it, because I figured if I can describe it in many ways, there'd be more people that can enter into the discussion. The second one is about kind of structure. It has a lot of prompts on there. So there's 10 questions that you could ask, 15 seconds. There's one that divides it up into sections, right? These are the things that I loved. These are the actions that I took. These are the hobbies that I had, like it divides things up that way. And then the third one are examples of, I think there's 3 or 4 examples of some ethical wills that people have written, so that you can just get an idea, some ideas on how other people have done it. But listen, like all things in life, I think that we need to translate them into our lives, what works best for us, what are our skills, how can we do it best, and what is it that I want to communicate to the people that I love.
I love that. What a beautiful way to end. So I want to, first of all, thank you, because this was so informative and a perfect capstone to this 3-part series. And even more so, I want to thank Hillside, because I think they really understand the value of education, that dying is not a moment that you just go to the mortuary and bury your loved one. It is a process that begins the moment you live, right? It's more about living than it is about dying. And all of these tools are to help us live well. And I can't thank Hillside enough, and also AJU for hosting myself and you, because it's been a pleasure to work with AJU and Hillside. So we want to tell everybody, please, please be well, start your ethical will today, get your directives, and start talking about death. There's nothing bad about it. Talk about it, talk about it, talk about it, so that we can live so well. Thank you so much. Be well.
Thank you.
On behalf of myself, the entire Hillside Memorial Park and Mortuary staff, Temple Israel of Hollywood community, including Hillside Council of Directors, we are proud to collaborate with AJU to present today's program, with gratitude to Rabbi Sherre Hirsch and Rabbi Jonathan Aaron for this important presentation on the importance of crafting your ethical will. May you and each generation to follow share in the love of family and tradition.